Hey guys, it's oーじまん. Today's video, it's not going to be very long, but I think I'm going to be covering probably one of the most important topics in the entire of this whole masterclass series. So today, what we're going to be covering is pronunciation, pitch accent, and also like the place of pitch accent and pronunciation study in the whole grand scheme of learning Japanese. So let's get into, first of all, how to learn it. So my opinions of how to learn it might be a little bit different compared to like what's like currently being stated by other creators and stuff, even amongst the immersion learning community. So in recent months and years, there's been a lot of focus now on pitch accent and like the importance of it in speaking Japanese. And there's even some people making the statement that to truly understand Japanese, truly enjoy content and actually even make any friends, you need to be perfect at pitch accent and pronunciation, or in particular pitch accent. So they state that from day one, you should be putting a huge amount of time into learning pitch accent and trying to like perfect it using courses and using, you know, Anki decks and all different methods to perfect your pitch accent right from the start. Now, I think this way of thinking about how to learn pitch accent is pretty fundamentally flawed. And I think it's kind of moving away from, you know, the core principles of getting everything from your immersion and using immersion as the kind of backbone to support all of your learning of Japanese. So instead of, you know, using courses or using Anki decks or going through and studying all these like, you know, a huge amount of rules and stuff, what I think is like really important is what you should do is in the beginning, I kind of covered this in like when I was talking about learning words, but I think to learn pitch accent at the start, all you want to do is you want to learn the real basic stuff. So you want to say, okay, pitch accent exists, right? So pitch accent exists. Here's a few different kind of patterns of it. And this is kind of what it sounds like. And that's all you really need to know. So for that, what I really recommend is if you're learning standard Japanese, go look at Dogen's phonetic series. That's a really, really good series. Don't try and like memorize everything, but just kind of watch it through just to get a real basic understanding of what pitch accent is. I think at the beginning, he really covers pitch accent. Then he goes into all different, you know, pronunciation sounds and all that. Don't worry about all that stuff. Just mainly focus on the actual pitch accent itself and all the different patterns. Don't worry too much about when it gets into the like real small little nitty gritty details, because that's not so much important. All those little details like that, they're going to come from your immersion especially. However, if you're interested in learning Kansai Ben pitch accent, I'll put a few links like in the description to some resources, but I really suggest if you're learning Kansai Ben, jump in the Discord and we've got a resource document with a bunch of Kansai Ben, you know, material that you can use to learn pitch accent and all that stuff. But even with Kansai Ben, the principle still remains. Like in the beginning, you just want to learn the real basic stuff just to get a real brief understanding of what it all is. Then from there, with Kansai Ben and standard Japanese, once you've got the real basics down, now you want to go back to the whole core principle of immersion is key. And what I mean by this is that now you know what it is. And like I said, with my words, you're kind of like learning some words with the pitch and all of that. So you'll know what to look, you know, listen out for in your immersion. You'll say, okay, well, I know what pitch it kind of sounds like. So eventually, the more and more better you get at picking up things in your immersion and listening, getting better at listening, you'll be able to pick out pitch accent way, way better. So like I stated before, some people are really adamant about you need to learn pitch accent right from day one and master it. But I don't know if it's practical or even really possible. I mean, it may be possible, but it's, you know, definitely very difficult and extremely impractical. For me, this is kind of the general way it went. In the beginning, I knew what pitch accent was. I could kind of listen out for it. If someone said an individual word to me, I could say, okay, that's probably this pitch accent pattern, or it's probably this, you know, this kind of thing. But in a sentence, if I was listening to a sentence, it'd be so difficult for me to pick things out. And, you know, I was like already so struggling so much to even pick out the meaning. It wasn't even like, I wasn't even thinking about the pitch. I was just trying desperately to even get the meaning out of the sentence. So when I think you really start to pick up the pitch accent and all of that is when you get fluent enough to be able to understand the meaning of everything to the point where you're no longer having to focus or even think to pick up the meaning of sentences. Like your native language, they'll just come into your head. You'll hear it and then you'll absorb it and you'll instantly know what it means. When you get to that stage, that's when you can start listening out and get better at picking up pitch of the individual words in the sentence and the sentence as a whole. Now, once you're able to pick it up in your immersion, that's when you'll be able to actually imitate it in your output. It's the same kind of principle with grammar and vocab and all of that. It's like, if you don't understand natural Japanese, how are you supposed to output natural Japanese? In the same way, if you don't know what pitch accent is meant to sound like in the context of a whole sentence, how are you supposed to output that? Even if you have the theoretical knowledge of it, it's the same way as in, if you learn all the theoretical knowledge of grammar and then go to output, you're going to be thinking while you're outputting. It's not practical and it's not how anyone really speaks a language, especially not their native language. So it's the same thing with pitch accent. If you're sitting there thinking of bloody rules all the time saying, oh, how do I say this? Like, oh, if this word goes with this word, what would be the pitch? What are you doing? You know, you've completely stepped away from the, you know, developments in immersion learning, and you're going back to the traditional learning methods of just rote memorizing everything. Like, you've taken everything that's good about learning Japanese through immersion and thrown it all away for absolutely no reason at all. So therefore, you want to get to a stage where you're advanced enough to be able to pick it all out in your immersion. And then once you're picking it out, you'll be able to use it in your speech easier and easier. And like I stated in the last video, there's no such thing as outputting too early and destroying your accent or making bad habits or anything like that. If you're good enough to know what the language is meant to sound like, you can easily fix those bad habits that you create. People might reference some studies and all these different things, but the realistic thing is those studies, most of them, when they're talking about, oh, it takes this many, you know, repetitions to correct a bad habit, but this many repetitions to make a good habit, a lot of those studies don't come from the context of language learning. They'll be like something completely else, like how to, I don't know, kick a soccer ball or something crazy like that. It's a completely different thing, and it's a completely different, you know, using a completely different part of your brain. So yeah, maybe it will be more difficult to fix bad habits, but you're not going to be able to get away from struggling in the beginning with speaking. Like I stated in my last video, this just comes back to all of what I stated in the last video. So therefore, don't worry too much in the initial stages about your pitch accent and all that. It doesn't really matter. So just get good enough to be able to understand sentences and be fluent enough in that way. And then that's when you'll be able to start picking out pitch accent in your immersion, and then thus, you know, being able to use pitch accent correctly in your output. You know, the evidence for this working is the fact that I speak, you know, predominantly in Kansai Ben pitch, you know, the Kansai dialects pitch. You know, what's really interesting about that is that back when I learned it, I didn't even know there was any theoretical, you know, resources like saying rules or anything for the Kansai Ben pitch. So I just learned every single thing by ear. Even though the rules are completely different, the patterns are completely different to standard Japanese, I thought, okay, well, immersion, you know, just listen, and eventually that'll be enough to get you to the level you want to be. So all I did was I didn't learn any of the basics even. I didn't even have that opportunity. All I did was I sat down and listened and listened and listened to Kansai Ben, you know, the Kansai dialect, until I was able to pick out with my ears all those little individual differences and then use it in my output. And now when I'm learning the rules for Kansai Ben, you know, because I do it every now and then just for, you know, interest-wise, I'll be like, oh, I already know this stuff theoretically. I'm just learning the, you know, the rules behind it all now. It'd almost be the same way as if a Japanese person sat down and studied the rules behind their own dialect. It's like, oh, that's how it all works. Even though I already know just from feeling how it should sound and how to put it all together, I'm learning the rule. You can learn the rules now and see why it is that way. But that just shows that it's not necessary, and you can get all of this from your immersion. Now, that's how to learn pitch accent. And that, you know, is a bit daunting to a lot of people because it doesn't exist in English. However, pronunciation, Japanese pronunciation is not difficult. Some people will say, oh no, it's really difficult. You know, it's hard to say this, hard to say that. Comparing it to any other language, it's just not difficult. There's a real small amount of sound in the language, and it's not so difficult to replicate them. And so the way you learn to speak with good pronunciation, because pronunciation and pitch accent are completely different. You know, some people you see, they'll say they have a perfect pitch, whatever, but they will have very good pitch, but their pronunciation will sound like a complete foreigner. So, you know, this means that their vowels, their consonants, all these things are completely off of what they should sound like. You know, Dogen covers the theoretical components of this in his phonetics course, I think, but it's really not necessary, in my opinion, to go over that stuff unless you're really interested in doing that. But this again comes down to the thing I talked about in the last part of this series of perfectionism. And it's like, if you're really doing this for just a hobby and your goal is to really perfect the language just for the fun of it, go ahead, you know, learn all this stuff, but it's not necessary. And I feel like it's kind of a waste of time in the beginning stages anyway. Maybe once you're really advanced, go back and learn that stuff to like really bring your Japanese to its maximum potential. But in the beginning stages, you know, for the first few years you're doing this, I feel like it's not very necessary to go through and learn the theoretical components of how to pronounce vowels and consonants and things like that. Instead, just like I've been saying with everything else, go immerse. You know, it all comes back to this in the end. Go immerse, listen to what it should sound like. And once you've listened to it enough, when you output, you'll know when you're saying something wrong. You can say it and you'll be like, that sounds a bit off. And then all of a sudden, you're correcting it yourself. So every time you say a word and every time it's off, you'll say that was wrong. Oh, I'll say it better this time. And you can keep improving it as you speak more and more and more. And this comes back again to what I said in the last part of the series of, you know, you're going to be shit at the start. you know, no matter what you do, you're going to be absolute shit in the start, especially because, you know, your mouth's not used to making these sounds, you know, you're not used to like producing the sounds of this language with your mouth and that. You know, it's different to saying it in your head. You know, when you're actually putting the sound out, it's completely different. So there's going to be some sort of trial and error process where you sit down, you try and make these sounds, you're bad at them, and then you slowly improve them over time as you speak more and more and more. And this is why it's so important to actually be actively practicing output and as well be inputting at the same time. So you're getting the information you need to output and you're outputting to, you know, correct yourself and improve your own output. So that's the real basis of how I would go about learning pitch accent and pronunciation. But the thing is with these two things is they're not very complex things, you know? You learn them by listening. At the end of the day, that's it. You might think, oh, I don't really get it. I'm not getting the pitch in my immersion. I can't pick it up. Even the pronunciation I'm struggling with. To anyone who's saying that, I want to ask you, how long have you been trying this for? How long have you been working at this for? If it's, you know, if you've been doing this for 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, did you ever consider the fact that maybe you're just not far enough into this to even be at the stage where you're going to be picking that out? You know, for me with pitch, it wasn't like from day one I could hear it. To be able to properly hear it in all of my immersion and get to the point I am today, it's taken me 3-4 years, you know? Even still today, the biggest thing that's improving in my Japanese comprehension ability is my ability to pick out the little details of pronunciation and pitch. Because it's kind of like, I'm sure a lot of you will know what I mean when I say that it's kind of like at the beginning, you're listening to someone speak, but it's almost like, it's like, you can't quite hear what they're saying. It's like there's a lot of background noise or something like that. So you can't really get the fine details, but you can kind of pick out the meaning. But it feels like you're kind of listening, you know, with a lot of background noise, so you can't pick out the little details of pronunciation and pitch and all those things. As you improve and as you get, you know, spend more time with the language, that background noise almost goes away, and it's almost like what the person's saying becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. Not in terms of meaning. Well, yes, in terms of meaning still, like the meaning gets more clear, but mainly in terms of the pitch and the pronunciation become easier to pick out the more you listen to it. So even still today, at the level I'm at now, where, you know, so people listen to my Japanese, like I posted that video, like the link to that video of Saito looking and nitpicking my Japanese, about, oh wow, you know, almost near native level ability there in terms of speaking. That may be true, but my listening is still getting better even today, even once I've reached that level of output. And therefore my output is probably going to get better and better still in Japanese. And this is just a constant process of inputting and then outputting, and, you know, that kind of feedback loop that just kind of goes forever, you know. The more time you use the language, the better you're going to get at that, and the better you're going to be picking out sounds and reproducing those sounds in your output. So if you're worried that you're not really getting the pronunciation or the pitch, maybe just ask yourself, have I really spent enough time with this language yet to even get to that stage? Because I feel like you probably haven't if you're asking yourself that. Because with me, I never thought about any of these things. I just listened, and then it all kind of figured itself out. You know, I think this as well comes back to, you know, keep it simple, you know. You've got to be keeping it simple, just immersing, and trust the process that eventually you're going to get to the point where you're able to pick out sounds and reproduce them in your output. Okay, now that I've covered how to learn all of it, now I want to get into what I believe to be the most important aspect of this, and that is, what is the importance of learning pitch accent and pronunciation, and how does this all fit into the whole thing of learning Japanese? Now, right off the bat, I want to say, there's a lot of people saying that this is an insanely important part of Japanese, and you need to be good with pronunciation and pitch to make friends, for people to want to be your friends, you know, so people to even want to talk to you and for you to truly enjoy Japanese media. Well, you know, do you know what really makes people not want to be friends with you? Is when you're so concerned about speaking perfectly that you don't put out your personality, and you're just like talking to a fucking brick wall. It's not about your pitch or your accent. Like I've said in my other videos, like, say, yeah, I'm down the street here in like Melbourne, Australia, right? I go to Chinatown and some Chinese bloke talks to me, and if he has a Chinese accent, I'm not going to be like, what the fuck, mate? Why you got a Chinese accent? Fuck off. Like, are you stupid? Why would I think that? You know, it doesn't matter what the person speaks like. You know, the people saying this, do they, you know, like actually in English, are they like discriminating against people who have bad pronunciation? Is it just a bit of racism? Like, I don't know what that is. You know, like, what are you talking about? You need to have perfect pronunciation for people to be your friends and stuff. That's ridiculous. It's not about how you speak. It's about your personality. Like, for instance, I know this Japanese bloke here. He came to Australia. He's a like backpacker. He's gone to like 1 million different places in Australia. The bloke can barely speak a word of English. He sounds ridiculous. I don't know what he's saying half the time. But he's got so much confidence when he speaks, and he's just trying to be a friend and like just talk, like be mates, He doesn't give a fuck about how he sounds. He's just talking and all that. And he's got heaps of friends. He's probably got more friends in Australia than I do, just because he's got such a good personality. He's so friendly and he's just putting it out, even with his broken English. No one cares. It's the same in Japanese. I mean, look at all these people. Like, for instance, there's this guy called Bobby Olagon. He's an African bloke. He's famous in Japan. He got famous, even though people laugh at his bad Japanese, everyone would still want to be his friend because the dude's funny, he's funny as, he's still got a good personality. It doesn't matter how you sound. It's the same thing. Like, I've made Japanese friends from like 2 months into learning Japanese with my broken Japanese where I didn't even know how to say I properly. I was using the female way to say I, like uchi. I was calling myself uchi because I thought that was like how you say it in Kansai Ben. But no, that's just how girls say it in Kansai Ben and some other dialects. So I look like a bloody idiot, and yet people still being my friend, because I'm not so worried about sounding perfect that I hide my personality away and just like try and speak like a bloody robot. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. All this stuff, it's just bullshit. Don't worry about your pronunciation, your pitch accent. It'll come with time. The more you do this, the better you get. All that's going to come with time. You're just stressing yourself out over nothing. Don't worry so much about it. So all I got to say is just chill the fuck out. Don't worry about trying to have perfect pronunciation and all this stuff and pitch accent. It doesn't matter. If you're trying to make Japanese friends and enjoy the language, anyone can enjoy the language. I enjoy listening to Slovak when I learn it, and I know like 1,000 words. I can barely understand anything, but I still enjoy the language. I still, can make friends even. It doesn't matter. Just don't be a robot. Put your personality out. Try and make friends. Have confidence. Having confidence is the main thing, not having a perfect accent or anything like that. It's ridiculous. So just anyone that's telling you need to have perfect pitch accent, pronunciation, or anything like that to make friends and to be good in Japanese, they're lying to you. In my opinion, that's a lie. It's either a lie or they've deluded themselves into believing that's the case. And the thing that's prompted me to say all this is I get a lot of comments, saying like, oh, I'm worried about my pitch. I'm worried about this. Who gives a fuck, mate? Like, I didn't care. I didn't worry about it whatsoever. It just comes with time. Like I said, that video of Saito, checking my Japanese, I can, use this as an example all the time now because I've got evidence. Like she's saying, yeah, I made some little pitch things, like, but it wasn't mistakes. It was differences between dialects. Like I wasn't, I was mixing standard Japanese and Kansai Ben because it sounds like I'm, someone born in Kansai, lives in Tokyo now kind of thing. Those are the little things I have wrong with mine. But other than that, it's perfect. I started outputting from 2 months in or something, didn't give a fuck about my pitch or my pronunciation, and yet I've almost perfected it just by staying consistent, sticking with the immersion, believing in the process, and just improving myself over time more and more by actually outputting the language and getting better, making friends and doing things like that. So don't freak out about all these things to do with pronunciation and pitch and all that. It doesn't matter. It'll come with time. Trust in the process and you'll get there in the end. Just don't worry about it. When it comes to making friends and that, be yourself, have confidence, and that's enough. Don't worry about your language abilities and that. At the end of the day, it's a means to an end of making communication with the person. What really matters in the end isn't the language and your language ability. It's your personality as a person and the other person as well. That's it. None of this other bullshit everyone's talking about. But yeah, that's the end of my little rant here on the importance of it all. So as you can see, yeah, learning pitch accent and getting better pronunciation can make you sound a lot better and make you sound a lot closer to perfect. But why you're doing it in the end, it doesn't matter. Like, if you want to sound perfect, go for it. But if you don't really care and you just want to enjoy the language and speak with people, it's enough. Don't worry about having perfect accent, perfect pitch, or any of this stuff. It's not necessary. But yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching to the end, guys. Please jump in the Discord, especially like I said at the start, if you're interested in learning Kansai Ben and learn all the pitch and that, we've got a good resource document that Fit Moon's put together, and he's, got about everything you can ever think of in there. So check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, I'll be putting out another episode to this masterclass series in a few days, so stay tuned for that. Thanks, guys.